Welcome back to KD&D, the show where we talk all things Dungeons & Dragons. Today I have some tips that are going to help both new and experienced game masters. We're going to talk about a concept called tension dice. These can solve for several problems in your game. One of which is if you have a game that needs to be run in a short amount of time. Second, it can also help with driving plot forward if players are stalling or getting sidetracked. And third, it can also, once mastered, work as a bit of a plug-and-play concept that I think would really be useful to new dungeon masters who are having a hard time coming up with story or following important beats while running a new game, or if you're intimidated by that. So the concept of tension dice is you start the game with some sort of scenario or some sort of problem that is inevitably going to happen. You're walking through a cave or exploring and it's going to collapse. Or you're trying to escape from prison and the guards are going to come back. There's something that's going to happen. Could also potentially be a good thing, depends on the tone of your game. This thing should be contingent upon the player succeeding or completing and successfully rolling or making ability checks. As the players try to complete that task or try to prevent that task from happening or complete something before the bad thing happens, every failure on the dice roll results in them contributing to a tension dice roll. This can appear as several different things. So the simplest way you can implement this tension dice concept is just set a number on a D20 or a D100, and whenever the tension dice roll is triggered, the insulting player rolls that D20, that D100, and they have to get below or above a certain number. It's kind of similar to maybe a sanity roll in a Call of Cthulhu game. There are some other variations of that. There is a board game called Betrayal, and in that game you roll what are called these haunt dice, and they have blank sides, two-sided sides, and one-sided side. And basically the idea is when you roll it, you need to get below a certain level number on this tracker. If you get, well, you don't want to get below it because that is what triggers the haunt, and you find out that there's a traitor amongst the players, and it's a lot of fun. But another unique way that you can use this concept, which I kind of found when digging through Alkander's Almanac of all things, this is in page 87 and 88, they talk about all this stuff, is the idea of building a communal dice tower. Now, I feel like dice towers are often given kind of a bad rap in the community. People think that they're just things that people do when they're bored and not paying attention to the game. But what if you made the dice tower part of the game? Anytime someone fails a check while going through or trying to complete this task, whether that's the ultimate task of the game or it's just a small skill challenge, that failure adds a new die to the stack. And maybe it's a particularly egregious failure, and instead of just stacking a safe D6, you have to stack a D8, a D10. As long as you don't take it up to D4s, then it's doable, but it gets tougher and tougher. And so the bigger the failure, or maybe the larger the consequence on the particular moment, that can change the type of dice, or maybe the number of dice. There's another tabletop role-playing game that uses towers and the falling of the tower to kind of compel the story along. That tabletop game is called Dread, and it's published by The Impossible Dream. If you Google Dread TTRPG on Google, it should be one of the first things that pops up. But Dread uses a Jenga tower at the center of the table, and anytime a player wants to try and accomplish an action that might be difficult or have some sort of circumstances in doubt or in sway, you have to pull something out of the tower. And maybe the thing that you're doing requires two successes. You see a vampire off in the distance, you have to pull once to resist their charm. The second pull is to resist their suave personality, and the third is to resist their claws as they rush for you, right? So you can kind of temper it with what you want to be, but typically with these kinds of games, given the high tension nature of a Jenga tower or a dice tower, you're dealing with a horror themed game, right? And horror themed games are nice because they can be quick, right? They're really great for one shots. But at the end of the day, this mechanic dice that you can use, this tension dice, can assist with a lot of things. Perhaps if you have players that are a little bit consistently off task, or they're prone to starting side conversations, anytime that kind of stuff happens, if it's getting out of bounds, you have to roll some tension dice. Of course, there's a fine line to walk there. You never want to be the domineering dungeon master that says you can't talk about other things, even when it's not your turn in combat, right? If you're having a quiet side conversation. But this can be helpful if the side conversations are derailing the game. okay? And if you've ever dungeon mastered for younger kids, you know what I'm talking about. This is not something that I feel like dungeon masters at their home games should be forcing upon their friends and guests. As I said, unless it's agreed upon at session 0 that this is something that can happen. Maybe every time someone makes a party foul, you have to roll on the tension dice. You spill a little beer. Oh, hey, you got to roll the tension dice, man. Party foul. So if you're a dungeon master that feels like they're having a hard time getting players to bite the hook and move along a story beat, then my suggestion to you is this. Come up with your setting and come up with a problem that the players have to solve, or something that will happen if they do nothing at all. Every time the players start to move in that direction, they will make a check, right? Or if they're trying to do something where the outcome remains uncertain, then they make a check. They fail, you make a tension dice roll, you stack something on the dice tower, you pull something from the Jenga block. Eventually, those dice or that tower will fall or trigger that number, and the story will continue moving along. That thing will happen, and then they will have to deal with the fallout of whatever that is. If you're playing D&D and that's combat, if you're playing a more free-form game like Dread and that's like a monster coming into the scenario that you have to figure out how to escape, whatever you want to do. But if you can just take this concept of like, you have this thing that you're trying to avoid, failure will trigger it, and then just plug that into different situations, any setting you can think of, any encounter you can think of, that's basically all you need to do to be a competent dungeon master. Because if something doesn't happen eventually, right? If the player's actions just kind of keep kicking an invisible can down the road, people get bored, people get off topic. But if there's consequences to your actions and things are happening that the players are trying to prevent, that's kind of what the thrill of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games can be. So I hope some of this word vomit maybe helped you out a little bit today. I thought the tension dice thing was a really cool idea. And if you stuck around this long, please leave me a like and give me a subscribe and do a comment thing. I totally messed up the rhythm of that. But hey, thanks for sticking around, and do subscribe because I have 3 more videos coming out in December, and I'm going to be creating a bit of a backlog for January. So if you're one of my early watchers and you have some cool ideas for things that you want to hear me talk about, drop them in the comments and maybe I'll feel inspired and I'll be able to talk about that. But until that happens, you have a great holiday. Welcome back to KD&D. Today I want to talk to you guys about some ideas that are going to help both new and experienced dungeon masters. We're going to talk about a concept